Welcome to High Strangeness, where we ask questions and explore all that is strange and unexpected in our reality.
Welcome to High Strangeness. I'm Tony, and this is the place where we talk about all things strange and unexpected in our reality. Currently, we are in October, the season of Halloween. This is the month where some people love to go to haunted attractions, and others go to places like Disney where fantasy runs wild. Some people love to get popcorn, hop on the couch with a blanket and settle in for a spooky movie, and then others like to nestle down with a good book and get lost in that unseen world within. Now, this month, we're going to talk about a lot of things that fit right into this time of the year. But today, we're going to start with fantasy. Today, my guest is author Jordan B. Jolley. He's a folklorist, author, and poet, and his writing career began when he was only 15 years old and was a freshman in high school. Since then, he has seen his fantasy series, the Tales of Draco, grow and flourish, as well as his collections of fairy tales, and he's also from a small town in Dayton, Idaho, and he's with us today. So with that, I want to welcome Jordan to our show and ask, how are you doing, my friend?
Good. Thank you.
Glad to have you today. You know, it's funny, when I said Dayton, Idaho, I almost said Dayton, Ohio. I had to catch myself quickly. Here. Is Dayton, Idaho a big town or is it a small town?
It's a small town, about 500 people, and it's just across the river from Preston, which is where they filmed Napoleon Dynamite. So that's what this area is most famous for.
That's great. I love that film. It's funny. When I first saw it, I didn't love it, but every time I saw it after that, I loved it more and more and more. It kind of grows on you. It was a neat film. So you are joining us from Idaho today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I just want to tell everybody out there that I actually ran into Jordan at a book signing here in Utah, and he seemed like a great guy, and we had a chance to chat for just a couple minutes. And at that time, I thought, as I looked at his book and just learned a little bit more about it, I thought this would be a great addition to my Halloween author lineup that I'm doing here in October. I have a number of authors that I've interviewed, and I thought Jordan's book would be great to add to that. So when I spoke with him, I was excited because he was game to jump in and do this as well. So I'm excited. Now, Jordan, when I caught you at that bookstore that one time, were you in the middle, at the end, or the start of like a book tour? What was going on with you?
So being in the summer, I did have a bit of a book tour that was going on at the time. Originally, I was going to go down to Albuquerque, New Mexico. My brother lives in Santa Fe, and we were just thinking while we were down there that I could do a book signing. Unfortunately, there were some scheduling conflicts that didn't really go through, but I was able to keep that one event in West Jordan. And, fortunately that was a very great event. And, we ran into each other and we started talking. And I am making some plans to do a book tour for Christmas, either in late November or early December.
That's great. And so if people want to catch you, I'll ask this again towards the end of the interview today. But while we're talking about it, what's the best way for them to catch your information and find out where you're going to be?
I have a Facebook account. I have my personal account, and then I have the account, the Tales of Draco, on Facebook. And I would say the best place to go to is my blog. It's called the Tales of Draco.wordpress.com. And I have a tab where I constantly update just where I'm going to go, where I've been in the past. And I sometimes it's out of date, but I like to keep it up as much as I can. So I don't have anything scheduled right now, but I am in the process of getting more. So if you ever go to my blog, you'll definitely find some more information there.
That's great. And do people have the ability to reach out to you through that blog if they have a question?
Yes, there's contact tab that you can send an email to me if you have a question, or if you'd like to get a signed copy of one of my books. I'd be happy to work with you for that.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, Jordan, we are going to get ready to jump into this and take people somewhere else mentally, right? But before we do that, I actually like to ask authors a lot of times a little bit about themselves. I think it's always fun to, before we dive into their material and what they've done, is to just learn a little bit about them and how they got to the point where they were an author and the book or books that they chose to write. Like, how did we get there? Now, your story is pretty interesting because you started as a pretty young guy writing books, and so I want to hear all about this. And I'm curious to find out, when did you first think or have the thought in your mind, I want to be an author? When did that start for you?
I would say originally when I was a lot younger, I did like to listen to stories. I loved to read, and I would say I had a pretty active imagination, but I was never really serious about going down the realm of a writer until I was about in 8th grade. And in middle school, at the time, I was struggling to find just some books that I would like. And eventually, when I was in 7th grade, I found a series called Redwall by Brian Jakes. And I really got hooked into that series. And that was the first series I got hooked into in a long time. And about a year later, when I was in 8th grade, I was just impressed at how you can, get into this whole new world just by reading symbols on a page. And so it really got me into literature and reading at the time. And eventually, just with these ideas swirling in my head that have been in my head for years, I just thought, why not write it down and, become a writer? And so I had an idea of where I would go with this. I was thinking about doing various different genres. And being 15 years old, a freshman in high school, I decided to go for fantasy about dragons because I was a 15-year-old boy, and who doesn't like that kind of stuff? So
Exactly right.
it originally started as just kind of a passion project, just having this amazing story about two people turning into dragons and just them overcoming the instincts, the impulsivities of dragons. And at the time, I was really thinking that, you read books about dragons. There are a lot of fantasy books, and most of the time, either the dragons are antagonists, they're the main antagonists, or they are kind of the secondary characters. And I know there are plenty of exceptions to that, but they didn't really cross my mind. And so when I was starting to put this story together, my first book, I decided to put it in the perspective of Jacob Draco, the main character. And so it's in his narrative, the first person point of view. And I think I got that from just reading Edgar Allan Poe. He has plenty of first person stories. And I think I would say that's what got me into it. And just since then, I've really liked using the first person point of view. Not all my stories have it, but I just feel like it provides kind of an in-depth to the story, as if somebody who experienced the whole thing is telling you what they went through. And it kind of gives you a sense of realism.
Yeah, I love that. So it's interesting because you're a pretty young guy, aren't you? You're mid-20s, something like that. Is
Yes.
that about right? Yeah. So, and you have like 3, 4, or 5 books already. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
I have 5 total.
5 total. That's amazing. So the interesting thing is, like, you, starting at the age of 15, I mean, that's amazing. And you knew early on you wanted to do something like this. So did you actually write the first book at 15, or how did that work at that age? Or were you putting it together at that point?
Well, when I first felt like, I'm young, but why wait? I have the story in my head right now, so why not write right now? And so
Yeah.
it was the late spring to early summer that I just kind of put down just what I had in my mind. And so I think I finished the original draft at around 3 months, took about 3 months to do. But the final product that you read right now has very little to do with that. And it wasn't until after I went back to reread this draft where I felt like, holy cow, I know nothing about writing. And so I went back, I made a lot of changes, and my book was originally published in 2015. I was 17 years old. I was a junior in high school, and it was super exciting at first. When I got that first copy of Rise of the Dragon, it just seemed like a miracle that my name and my story was in print. And just immediately after, I did notice that even though I made some big steps forward from when I first started writing, I felt like I still had a lot of way to go. There were a lot of novice errors that I saw and a little lacking in the editing. So I went back and I redid the story. And by then I was working on my sequel, The Six Pieces. And just to have better continuity, I did make a few changes. And so the final edition, or at least the present edition right now, was published in December of 2018. So it's a few years old now. And I've just been working on there since. But just that ever since I got into the realm of writing, it has definitely changed my perspective of literature. And I don't know if this is hard to believe or not, but I get a lot of people who tell me that my writing is a waste of time, and they give various reasons, whether like some people say that fiction is just a waste of time. It's not real. Others say that it's pointless to write now because we have AI. You can use AI to write these stories, which I'm a big skeptic of AI. And I've just kind of learned that literature is just a form of expression, the same way with art, with music, with poetry, things like that. And I've just gotten a real respect for that. And I've been reading a lot of classics lately, just some of the books that I feel have been the greatest stories ever told. And I've just developed a deep fascination, not just with the stories themselves, but also what they mean, and, getting into the philosophy, into the heads of these different writers, and to see just how they interpret the world. Because even when you write stories that involve fantasy or something surreal, it's still a form of expression, and that, these fantasy worlds have a lot of echoes of our reality.
Yeah. I think that's great. Listen, don't listen to those people. You know what I'm saying? You keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. The thing is, we can say that about anything. Look, AI can reproduce music now. It can reproduce art, and it's eventually could take many of our jobs. So that's ridiculous, right? To not do something that's inside you. You know what I mean? That you can share with
And
people.
I
It's
think that
crazy.
even though AI can replicate the basics of a story or with music or something like that, you can never program the insight, the philosophy, the human spirit. That can never be replicated in artificial intelligence.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yes, it lacks the human soul of these stories, and with that, these productions of AI, they might entertain you for a few minutes, but they'll never have any lasting impact without the heart.
Right. Right. Well, just a couple more points on this before we move on. I mean, I'm a huge football fan. I love football, but really, it's a fantasy. I'm not playing it. It's I'm watching something, right? And I'm getting enjoyment out of it. So it's, I mean, I think it's silly when people say stuff like that. Now, I have a daughter-in-law, so she is in her mid-20s also, and she is a big lover of fantasy books and that sort of thing. And nothing is better for her than to be able to pull, a blanket up, sit down, and just get lost in these stories. So I think it's powerful and it's wonderful. And it takes you somewhere up here that you really can't go in a lot of the other places. So good for you. Okay, Jordan, I've got a question for you. Before we start diving into any of the topic here, I want to know, and this is important for people who may be listening to this who also are inspired by this and maybe want to be an author themselves. For you, what is your routine? How do you come up with material and start to piece it together? Is it a spontaneous thing, or do you have a process you go through in which to put that stuff together?
I'd say a little of both. A lot of these ideas, especially now, the way I treat my fantasy now is a lot different from when I first started. I like to use fantasy as reflections of our real world, just in a way to see ourselves from a different perspective. And in my most recent novel, Cassie's to Quicksandsby, it's the third Draco book. Jacob is given this form of therapy where he closes his eyes and he envisions himself looking at himself from above and seeing just like who you are. How are you perceived from different angles, from different viewpoints? And so, honestly, there's a lot of crap in the world, go watch the news if you don't believe me. And I think a lot of these problems comes from the lack of understanding what the other person is trying to say or who's standing for. And so you just constantly ignore what they're trying to say and just bark your idea. And I just kind of feel like you need to think critically about these things. And so I just feel like these problems in the world, I feel like can be fixed by just shutting your mouth for just a few seconds and to listen to what someone else has to say. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you can at least understand where they're coming from. And so a lot of these things, I just write down just kind of my thoughts, my concerns in a journal. And afterwards, I just see how that can connect with, with things of the past, like with folklore, because humanity has faced similar things before. And so when you think of like these old legends about fairies, about nymphs, about elves or satyrs or whatever, you can use those as reflections and representations, and you can use what these old beliefs are and apply them to what we have today.
I love that. And actually, this is a perfect segue to kind of how I want the conversation to go first. We definitely are going to get into some of your books, but we talked before a little bit about in this time and season, the big thing is fairies and how some people interpret those and how they were experienced in the past and what they could be today if you look at things that people experience today. So I want to go in the direction of that for just a little bit here. So fairies, I want to talk about that. Can you tell me, or if you understand this, like, do you know the difference between various types of fairies found in different cultural myths? Do you know anything about that you could share with us?
Yeah. And one of the books that I like to use for studying these different things is it's just called Fairies. It's by Brian Froud. And I originally checked that book out in the library, and since then I've got my own copy just because I keep going back to it. But you notice that different regions have kind of the same kind of creature, whether it's a goblin or the knockers or the spriggans or things like that. And you can see how the Irish have a variant, the Cornish have a variant, the Germans, and even like in Native American cultures, in East Asian cultures and all that. And so you can see a lot of similarities to all these creatures. And even though they can have very different names, they can practically be the same thing. Fairies are pretty much like spirits of nature that you can't see. And, some phenomena in nature you can blame on these fairies, whether metaphorically or literally, depending on your belief. And,
Yeah.
and you could just see how we as people interpret the world as we do, whether it's on the spiritual perspective or on the rational perspective, things like that.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. And it is interesting because there is definitely some people out there that are now looking at what has been experienced in the past and saying, really, just what you said, is it the same thing, but we're defining it or we interpret it just slightly different today? Maybe spirits were looked at one way years and years ago, and today people think they're seeing, a spirit from another dimension, and it's a UFO, or it is
Yeah.
interesting how that all can be there. So
Yeah. And, one noteworthy thing is that, a lot of us wouldn't really say that we believe in fairies anymore. They're just things of our imagination. But, being Halloween, how many of us believe in ghosts and, spirits of people who lived in the past, or of demons? A lot of religious people still believe in things like that. And, and a lot of us, when we believe in ghosts, we believe that these are spirits or entities that we can't see. And, in a way, that's kind of what fairies are. I have this book right here. I was just kind of breezing through it before we started, but I actually got this out of Barnes and Noble a while ago. I don't know if you can read that.
okay.
It's Fairies, the Myths, the Legends, the Lore. And in the introduction, it says that how there are different layers to reality, or different channels. When you think of radio or a TV, you're going through a station and you're watching a program, but the other programs you're not watching are still being broadcast, even though you don't see them until you tune into them. And, you
Yes.
can say that ghosts are the same thing. And, a lot of things that we believe are ghosts now, or certain entities of ghosts, whether they're, oh shoot, the Irish ghost, the banshee, a lot of
Mm,
us say that, oh yeah, it's a ghost in Irish folklore that, her wail means that someone is about to die. And, the banshee is a type of elf called she. And so you can see that they were once perceived as elves, when most of us today perceive the banshee as a ghost. And so it's
yeah.
almost synonymous in a way.
Right. Right. Jordan, what was the name of the author of the book that you just pointed out a minute ago?
Um, Sky Alexander, Skye.
Okay. The reason why I ask is because I have scheduled a another interview very shortly with talking about banshees and folklore as well. So, and this person has several books, and that title sounded like one of them. That's why I was checking. So, very cool. That is good. Now, the behaviors and that are attributed to these different fairies and folklore, you were mentioning that there's some commonality, right? And it's just the way it's interpreted. Am I putting words in your mouth? Is that what you think?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm going to ask this question. We're already kind of talking about it, but I have it here. I thought I'd ask this, which is, how have the depictions of fairies changed from ancient times to modern times? And do you think there's connections to other paranormal entities like ghosts or spirits? You've kind of answered this, but I don't know if you want to say anything more about it.
Yeah. Well, I think, the thing about like the belief in ghosts and paranormal things, isn't extinct. It's not even close to extinction. And I remember I was writing in my blog one time, and I think it was either last year or the year before. It was in October for Halloween. And I was just kind of talking about, the belief in ghosts and things like that. And since 1990, the percentage of Americans who believe in ghosts is actually going up and not down. And
Yeah.
and I think regarding fairies, I think with fairies, they're used more metaphorically now. A lot of us, when we
Yeah.
think of, gremlins, like you try to start your car, it won't start. You're like, oh, it's the gremlins. I don't know if people actually say that, but, and the gremlin, that term itself isn't that old. I think it was coined in the 1940s, but, similar entities have just kind of been used for just as a figure of speech. But,
Yeah.
and again, a lot of things people believe in some of these entities, only now they call them ghosts and not fairies.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting. Right. I feel like, and I do a lot of interviews with different people in all areas, but I think we all have to keep our minds open to some of these things because right now there's a big thing with UFOs, which are now called UAPs. I don't know if you're aware of some of that stuff, but um, it's the government has all but admitted that they're catching these things on their radars and stuff like that. And I think it's interesting. There's people out there that'll say there isn't a God, there isn't a devil. Then there's people that are saying there isn't there is not UFOs, and I think we're seeing all these things, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if one can exist, the others can exist. And fairies from the past, or UFOs from today, or God throughout the history of man, and angels, they may all be true. And I think we just need to be open to some of this. So I think
Yeah,
it's
I think
interesting.
being open-minded and, um, I would say that a lot of, atheists and rational people, their argument is they're just phenomena that we don't understand yet, kind of like,
Yeah.
thunder and lightning. I mean, thousands of years ago, we didn't know what was causing that or why. And so we associated them with, gods and,
Yeah.
masters of creation, of material. And, you could say that today people, a lot of people are still religious, or they believe in some of these supernatural things. And, I would say that one of the things that they can argue for is saying that just because we understand how something works doesn't really take out the mysticism of it. And so
Yeah.
when you see a lightning storm, like, we know that it's electricity and we know how it runs, but, some people could say that that doesn't take away the fact that it's an act of God, or an act
Right.
of a spirit, or things like that.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. Thank you. Okay. Good conversation so far. Jordan, I want to now let's jump into your material a little bit. So, um, I know you have a couple of books here. I'm just looking through them right now. Fairy Tales and Fables. You've got two volumes there, and then you've got your Draco series. So, like you were saying earlier, 5 books, pretty impressive. So, I think I'm not sure. Would you rather talk Tales of Draco first, or the Fairy Tales and Tables? Any preference?
Um, I think I'd like to start off with the Tales of Draco, just because that's kind of what kicked off this whole thing. So
Sure, sure.
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, go ahead. I know that you have Jacob Draco and his friend Clipper, right? And my thought was, take us on this adventure. Walk us through how these stories unfold through each of your volumes. Can you do that for us?
Okay, I'll try doing that without spoiling anything. So
Yeah, keep some of it secret. Yeah,
so Jacob Draco and Justin Clipper, who goes by his surname, they're friends who, at the start of the story, live in New York City as grad students, and they're at the fictional Atlantic College of Biology. And, they've been on this experiment. They've been going around the world. They've been studying different animals, collecting blood and DNA samples, and they're just going to study just the similarities of each of them, because Jacob, he's loved animals since he was younger. He grew up in Oklahoma. He grew up on a farm, and he feels close to nature that way. And while they are collecting these samples, they return to New York to start on these experiments. And they discover this person that they knew for a few years now. His name's Monty. He seems to get in the way, and he's starting to do some dangerous things about that. He has these people that are working for him who are trying to steal these samples, and they do at one point, and they're willing to harm their friend Sally Serene for these samples. And Monty keeps on saying, look, it's for the better. If I let you have this, you're going to create something the world's not ready for. And so he seems to believe that something is awry with this. And Jacob and Clipper are able to ensure that Sally's safe while keeping their samples back. They go to their private lab, and after an incident in the laboratory, they end up taking these mixtures that were meant for a rat. And after that, they aren't too concerned. You know, they feel a little woozy at first, but after a while, they start to notice changes. Clipper starts feeling some pain in his mouth. Jacob feels like he's getting a lot more short-fused. He gets angry easily, and he just notices that his senses are a lot more keen. And you know, after a while, they have a dinner with some friends, and Clipper, who was originally allergic to fish, suddenly loves it, and it doesn't bother him anymore. And then they fall sick, and they pass out overnight, and then they wake up as dragons. And, you know, when they first become dragons, they're not really themselves. Their brain is still just adjusting to this new depiction of life. And so they act violently at first, but then when their minds start to clear, they just don't know what to think of it. You know, we're these creatures that can breathe fire and fly and all these things like that. And, you know, these creatures aren't supposed to be real, and yet here we are. And so this kicks off just this adventure of them trying to figure out who they are. And they remember that Monty has kind of predicted that. And he learns that Monty is a part of this group that lives in Europe. So they end up going to the UK, they end up going to France and up into Norway. And they meet these people that call themselves the Monolegions. And the Monolegions, meaning the one tribe, they're the last tribe of a race of people called the Nibelungs. And if any of you are up on your Germanic folklore, the Nibelungs were a race of dwarfs that, you know, they created, you know, elements of magic. If you ever read the poem, The Nibelungenlied, or The Ring Cycle by Richard Wagner, and they discover these people, these dwarfs, they call themselves, are real people. And they're in allegiance, along with Monty, to some king they don't know about. And so that's all I'm going to say for the first book, Rise of the Dragon, because I don't want to spoil anything. But
that's great. But can I ask you a question about this real quick?
Go ahead.
I love that. So my question is, is this existing in our current time frame? Is this like today's time, or in the past, or in the future?
About the same time period. There might be some things that people think are a little out of fashion, but I'm an old fashioned guy. So I would say it's a contemporary timeline.
Okay. And then my second question, and then we can continue on, is, you know, I'll just use this as an example. They're, you know, like the Harry Potter series, where, in my opinion, they straddle two realities. So there's like the rest of the world, and then they take this train or go to this portal sort of, and now they are at the castle school, right? And then it's kind of, things are more strange and wondrous things happen there. Through your books, do they find themselves straddling two realities, or are they in one reality more than the other?
they straddle at first because Jacob and Clipper, they later learn of another world that the locals call Elsov, and they begin to understand that they themselves have more connections to Elsov than they originally know. And Elsov is basically a region in what we would call the fairylands in a general term, or the land of fairy that I read in some works. And but as the series goes on in the second, especially the third books, they discover that this fairy world is not exactly as they would expect. So when you think of a fairy world, what time period would you usually say it is?
I don't know, maybe medieval times, something back in that area back then.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
so you read a lot of stories, or you hear a lot of stories of these fairy worlds being around the medieval times. But when Jacob and Clipper learn more about Elsov, they discover things are beginning to change. You know, it's a little more archaic than our world, but they notice that, philosophies are changing, production is changing. It's almost like it's about the start of the Industrial Revolution. And the reason why I did that is because I have a deep interest in, the 19th and early 20th centuries, because, things that have been in the system for thousands of years are suddenly being turned on their heads. And so you could argue that, like, the start of all these changes started in the early modern period, like the 15th, 16th centuries. It wasn't until the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution started, when factories popped up, the whole system of a city changed, and with that came changes in perceptions of the world, in how we view each other. You started questioning moralities like slavery, or the idea of giving the power to an absolute monarch, or if there are ways to run a nation that's right the people. And I think I really got interested in this when I read the book War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, because that book was written in the 1960s. It takes place in the Napoleonic Wars. And Tolstoy, he doesn't consider that book a novel. He considers it a philosophical discussion. And if you read the unabridged version, it's a huge book. There's so much good material in there. And a lot of it, Tolstoy just questions, the nature of humanity, the nature of war. Why do we feel so inclined to conquer our enemies? Why do we have enemies? Why do we feel like to shoot and kill people and not think that that's immoral in any way?
Yeah.
Are we just justifying ourselves by saying that these people are enemies that deserve to be extinguished from the world, or things like that? And so there changes, and I just wanted that to be reflected in Elsov, this fairy world that's starting to question the state of things, the nature of things, their relations with God, and things like that. In the Industrial Revolution, when you look at religion, all of the things that were originally dogmas and stuff are just being questioned, and the way people treat God, or the lack thereof, is just changing. And we may think that the 1800s is such a 200 years ago, but when you compare it to things, we're really not that far away, and we're still feeling the effects of that in the digital age. With the digital age, that all started with the industrial era, and we move the world from, say, 980 to 1200 AD. Sure, there were a lot of political changes and wars and many events, but the way people saw society, saw their nation, and things like that, there wasn't that much change for a long time up until this point. Then suddenly everything is just changing to the point where, 5 years ago, where we could be living in a completely different world 5 years ago to today, in the next 5 years, and so on.
True. Yeah, that's very true. Cool. That sounds very interesting. So you've kind of walked us through there. I love that you were able to do that just to whet their appetite, right? And not really get into too many details. Anything else that you want to talk about in the Draco series before we jump into your first two books? Right, the other two books are your first two books, or are they intermingled in between?
The fairy tale books. I actually started writing my first set shortly after completing this. It did get published before the six pieces,
Okay.
and I think around that time, I was really getting into not just fantasy itself as a genre, but the folklore of it and how how these folklores, different cultures, impacted the way we think, the way we talk, the way we dress, the way we design our buildings, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really got into Hans Christian Andersen at this point, and that led me into different things of folk tales. The Brothers Grimm, Andrew Lang, Charles Perrault, yada yada. And I just figured that you can write a compelling, fantastical story just with a short story, and it can accomplish big things as well as a novel. And even though it may not have as much to say than a novel can, they can still pack a punch. And along with these fairy tales, I started studying Edo and Bradbury and their short stories, how they can accomplish such things. And
Yeah.
so when I
Yeah.
started these fairy tales, I didn't really want to do like a retelling of a past folk tale. I wanted to just kind of take these thieves and just this brand of folklore and tie it into a situation or a thing I want to express. So I wrote, I think, 12 stories in my fiction, the six pieces,
Wow.
and then a few years later, I published my second set of fairy tales. And I was starting to write a few for a third volume, but I think just the changes in the way I want to publish my books, I'm now publishing them on my blog, and for now they're free to read, so you can just go there and read some of
Oh
my
wow.
latest fairy tales. And with October, I am planning to write about the terrible wolf, which made his first introduction in the second fairy tales book, and he's kind of a werewolf because I've studied the origin of the werewolf superstition, and just an homage to the big bad wolf in all of these stories.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I want to complete that by October, and as this is being broadcast, it might be out already. So if you want to read
Oh,
it, you can look it up.
yeah, that's great. People need to hop onto your blog post and see that and get a little extra in right before Halloween. That's good. Okay. Thank you for sharing some of that stuff. So just a recap for people. So we have the two that you were just talking about right now, fairy tales and fables and other short stories, collection one, and then you have collection two. And you were saying there's about six or so in each of those. Is that correct?
I'd say 12 in the first one and a little bit more in the second one.
Okay, great. And then Tales of Draco. And there's the six pieces, Rise of the Dragon. Awesome. Well, as we move through to the end, towards the end, um, before we step off of fairy tales and fables, do you have maybe one of those that you would like to share just a little deeper? One of the stories?
Okay, I'm trying to think about which one. So some of these stories, they represent just some moral issues that I see that I want to address. Others are fables with animals. Like Jacob, I love animals, and I love watching them and things like that. And so I created a few stories with animals. Um, I think for Halloween, I'll talk about my first terrible wolf story.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
it's called merchant's son, a tale of terrible wolf. And this story takes place in Prussia in the mid in the 1750s. And the reason why I chose for this tale is because Germany has loads of these fairy tales, and with the whole werewolf subgenre, they're big on that too. And so I just started to write this story about what these werewolves represent. As back in the day, people suspected others of being werewolves the same way you expect some people of being witches, and they would have trials and stuff. And so this story, it's about this merchant and his wife and son. They're going through the forest. They're on their way to Potsdam, and the sun starts going down. They set up camp, and they realize that they have a big mosquito problem. And so the mother sends Otto, the son, to this local village to get some cream for it. But when there, he notices that all the shops are closed, the houses are shut, and the only person there is the lamplighter and the old man. And he gets very concerned about Otto, and he says he shouldn't be here. It's very dangerous tonight. And Otto doesn't really know why, and so the old man says, it's the terrible wolf. It's the full moon. He's coming tonight. And he tells him to go back to his family and to warn them. But when Otto returns, his family's not there, and all he sees is a terracotta lamp in the shape of an owl just swinging in the tree.
Wow.
And he has his first encounter with the terrible wolf there, but the light from the lamp is keeping the terrible wolf at bay. And afterward, his family, he wants to search for them. He can't find them. The village can't find them. So he lives in the village for a while, and then used to learn more about the terrible wolf. And he starts to learn more about the local wolves of the area, the true wolves. And he learns that these true wolves are being persecuted as well, and he's able to talk to them. And don't question it, it's a fairy tale. They're not supposed to make sense. But he's able to talk to them, and the wolves believe that the terrible wolf is a man's creation, and that they can so they can go in and exterminate the wolves. And I got there because humans and wolves are natural competitors. We occupy similar territory. We hunt similar animals for food, like deer. And sometimes when we cross paths, things happen, and that's just a part of nature, unfortunately. And Otto needs to learn that true wolves are not these evil, vicious monsters that a lot of these stories make them out to be. When you think of the sounds of hell, you think of people screaming, fire burning, and wolves howling and things like that. So he learns that real wolves are not the same as terrible wolf going by. And Otto learns where his parents are, and he has to defeat the terrible wolf if he's to get them back. And I'll just leave it there.
That's great. Thank you. That's very interesting. Okay, people, you're going to want to go back to his blog post to see this and to read the rest of this. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Jordan. I love these things are very interesting. I mean, just as you've explained them, I think people are going to really be interested. What do you hope your readers walk away from or walk away with as they finish reading one of your books? I know that you've been very intentional about some of the things and the way you portray it. But what do you hope people walk away with after reading one of your books?
I think ultimately I hope they're entertained, but I think also I'd like to see them, read these stories with critical minds to know what these stories mean, because I do put a lot into these stories, and I don't like to just state them out loud at the very end. And I do on some of my earlier fairy tales just to follow the tradition of Aesop, but I kind of learned to take Hemingway's advice and do, I think he calls it iceberg theory, where he feels that the theme of a story can can have such a bigger impact when you only have the surface of the theme out there. If you have a problem or you want to discuss, a moral topic or something like that, you just kind of glaze over it, and then you can read the story itself. The story presents the theme and how they can address that. And so I do hope that those who had my books, I hope you enjoy them. I hope they're entertained, and I hope they can, have a better understanding of the world around them. And these fantasy stories are obviously escapism, and I know a lot of people, especially fantasy lovers, they dive into these stories just as a forms of escapism. You had a rough day in school, work, and you just kind of want to let go, relax, and just enjoy this. And I just kind of feel like while you're doing that, you can at least present our world from a different perspective to see above ourselves and just see how we act and react to other people, and how we can ultimately better ourselves by knowing our part in the world.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much. So this next question is mostly for somebody. I am aware of somebody that is interested in someday being an author someday down the road, and their book of choice is fantasy. So, what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking of that for their future?
I think ultimately, if you want to express it in literature, in writing books and things like that, first of all, you need to have a passion for literature. If you write just because you think you can make an easy buck, that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. And you think of, well, I just want to be like J.K. Rowling and make $1 billion off of or pounds off of these books, but she's the exception to the rule, and a lot of these successful authors are exceptions to the rule. Because most, even those who success, aren't always rich, and they don't get a lot of money. My books, when I sell them on Amazon, I only get like a little bit out of for royalties. And, most of my sales are e-books on Amazon, and so they, you can imagine the paycheck. It's not quite enough to get by, but I'm not writing these books just for money. And if you think you can do that, then you'll be very disappointed, and you'll probably find out that writing isn't for you. You got to be a writer. Want to be a writer? You got to love to write. You got to love to read. You got to love the craft, the medium of artistic expression. And I think also, if you're new to reading, I would read a lot of books. Not just those you like, but those that you just feel like you can study the craft, and find styles that you like, styles that you may not like as much, but they're okay. You can find your own style that way, and just write the way you want to. I've heard some people. I've met Christopher Paolini one time, and he wrote the Aragon series, and he said that he writes a lot, and he has a very strict schedule, a daily schedule, and to keep his writing up and going. And I've heard some writers say that they write from sun up to sundown, and I'm not somebody who does things. My schedule of writing is a little inconsistent, because some days I can get a lot of writing done, other days you just go outside and do things and work. Working with your hands can really create the brain. I find that chopping wood, playing tennis, playing basketball, things like that, just being active. So I would say just living an active life can really help you think of these stories that you'll want to say. And then and just find your own schedule, whatever works for you. You don't really need to copy the method that your favorite authors do. And so I actually use a typewriter to write my stories, and I just use that just to get my thoughts to words, to not worry about the finer details. So I have a couple of different typewriters, and I do eventually put these stories onto the computer to fine tune them and um, edit these. But I like to use the typewriter, and you can write. You can write with the typewriter. You can write with the computer. That's obviously the preferred method. Or you can handwrite them. I mean, short stories. I can't remember which. I wrote them on a napkin while I was in the hospital.
Wow.
I was visiting somebody who was having surgery, and I there was something that I write about. I knew what to write, but I didn't have any materials, so I just borrowed them. And I just went to a paper, tore it off, and just wrote down on there. So
Wow.
so everything
That's great.
it's all open to whatever works best for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I think sometimes people need to hear that so they have permission to express it in their way. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. I really enjoyed this conversation, Jordan. And I know you've mentioned this earlier, so, and I said I would bring it up again. How can people find you, follow you, and watch your work and see where you're going to be visiting when you do book signings and stuff? So,
Okay, you can definitely follow me on Facebook. You can follow for the Tales of Draco. You could also my personal or my personal account. And I don't use X or TikTok or anything like that. I just have certain feelings towards them. So I do use Facebook. I do have Instagram. It's just Jordan B. Jolley. And I would say the best place to learn more about me is to visit my blog, thetalesofdraco.wordpress.com. I write posts about the writing process, some of the things that I found in Miso folklore, or just new announcements of new works, and like I said, I'm starting to publish my newer short stories on there, and you can reach out and you can find links to where you can buy my books online, or you can find the schedules of where I'm going to be next.
that's great. Thank you very much. So, Jordan, before I let you go, what's in your future? Any projects that are at the back of your mind that are getting ready to come out? Anything that people will see Jordan's name behind in the next 5 years, maybe?
I would definitely keep in touch with my short stories. The main novel I'm working on is not technically part of the Tales of Draco. It's going to be a standalone novel, and it is in connection with that. It's part of the same lore, but it's going to be apart from Jacob and Clipper's saga. And all I'm going to say about it right now is currently it has to do with the legend of King Arthur and Camelot.
That's great. Thank you. Well, once again, it's been great, Jordan. Thank you for sharing and taking us on a little trip to this world of fantasy that you have in your books. This is place where everybody can go, right? I mean, and everybody should try it out. So if you need a break, some of us do this and some of us do that, but pick up a book and get lost in this world of fantasy and see what you can pick up from it. Well, so there you go, everybody. Today we took a journey into this universe within, and there you go. You have some materials. You've got a new author to check out in Jordan. And I want to just say to you once again, Jordan, thanks so much for being on the show today and telling us a little bit about your work. I want to tell you and wish you a very happy holiday season coming up. And I just want to say to the rest of you out there, remember, there's a lot of strange and unexpected in our reality. So keep your eyes, ears, and minds open. And until next time, stay safe.
Thank you for listening to High Strangeness. This was a glance at some of the strange that exists in our reality.